We're really glad that everybody came, and huge thank you to everyone who put up with the many links there. Thank you so much for sticking around. I am the marketing side of things, not the tech side. So we want to talk today a little bit about why it is that data management is important in social housing, how it can have a positive impact on being able to provide the housing that people need in an efficient and cost-efficient way, time-efficient and cost-effective way. So we brought together Micheal, McLaughlin, and Billy Holt here. They're from HACT in the UK. And I'm going to let them, because if I introduce people, I ramble on for an age. I will let them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what HACT does and kind of what your goals are within the organization.
Excellent. I'm happy to kick off with that, Billy. So I'm Micheal McLaughlin. We work for HACT, which stands for Housing Association Charitable Trust. HACT have worked with the sector, and particularly in the UK, for the past 60 years, almost as an advocate for the sector, but looking to provide solution to kind of current challenges. So when we first started, a lot of that was around kind of direct developments and around kind of funding opportunities for housing associations. What we found as the sector's progressed and as kind of further regulation and the kind of federated bodies and stuff, that actually where we are really needed and we support the sector is around providing kind of innovative solutions. So we see ourselves as a kind of an innovation agency, and Billy can talk about some more detail around some of the things we do within that. One of my position is a digital lead, and the kind of main part of that is our kind of digital and data standards. So we've created a kind of data standards, which is a kind of dictionary with definitions and a data model for the kind of main pain points that housing associations feel when it comes to data quality. And as part of the work we're doing just now is to increase data quality across the sector, and obviously with data management at the key, and actually one of the kind of main asks of that is how does improved data management benefit social housing organisations. And obviously it's a certainly a big question with an even bigger answer. So it would be good to unpick some of that today with you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Billy. I'm Market Insights Lead at HACT. I've been at HACT for the last couple of years and kind of been in different roles. Yeah, just to pick up more broadly on what Micheal was saying, we're very much kind of an insight-driven organisation. So we're very much about understanding problems in the sector. We do a lot of research activities working with UK housing providers, exploring kind of the services they offer from, whether they're implementing community investment activities through to the kind of social value perspective of measuring some of that impact as well. And yeah, kind of data is a common strand across a lot of the work that we do, and kind of getting that data right, whether it be kind of understanding the impact a housing provider is providing, but also kind of managing that building safety perspective as well. We've really seen that data is important as a kind of fundamental touchstone to all of the stuff that we do. So hence that kind of data standards focus that we've had for the past 4 years. So we're happy to kind of talk more about the approach we've taken, and maybe if some of that is replicable in kind of different contexts.
Fabulous, thanks. We're happy to have you here. And for those of you guys who are new to Bynaric, and IPS, we're a new software platform for social housing providers, where we make it easy to do your data management, to have data analysis, to have clean data, all the things the guys are going to talk about today. So let's get started then. Billy and Micheal, what kind of, for people who are kind of new to data or sort of scared of the idea of data management, big data can be a bit overwhelming. What's your just sort of definition of this idea of data management?
Kick off a nice easy one then. I'll happily start that, and if there's anything that I miss out, or for the massive gaps that I do miss out in that, Billy, if you could fill them in, that would be wonderful. So data management, I suppose for us, the kind of key to that is having a kind of framework or a strategy for that. There's loads of strands to it. Where we came in was around data quality. We began working with Microsoft on a project around big data in social housing, And what we found was pulling data sets from social housing providers. We couldn't get any real insights from them at all because the data quality was so poor, and it just wasn't comparable across organisations. And you know, that was kind of 5 years ago. We've kind of embarked on loads of different kind of ways with the sector engaged with them to increase that. So for us, you know, data quality is massive, and as you referred to, you know, having kind of good quality and clean data is massive. And the reason that is we want data to tell the one truth about the organisation. So you might have various platforms, or you might have kind of various agencies to your social housing organisation, and it's important that they're speaking to each other. You know, there's some stuff just now around kind of integrity and transparency that's become really important, particularly in the UK with the government social housing white paper that kind of calls out exactly that, you know, the need for transparent data. So that's obviously really key in getting all that right. You know, I think the thing you mentioned about analytics, so obviously you have to have good quality, reliable data that's telling the same story and able to enable you to be able to analyse that properly and look at kind of you know, BI options. So it's important that you have your internal systems architecture right. So that's about having the correct platforms who speak to each other with the kind of correct plugins, but also it's about having, you know, a standard of data and a standard of how you manage that data. So not necessarily about being prescriptive about the data process, but to make sure that that data process is efficient as possible. I think, you know, all of these things are massive. So, you know, kind of data modeling to ensure that that kind of internal kind of data architecture is right to provide the kind of backing for analytics. There's other parts about data management. So it's about having staff capabilities. So it's about training, you know, increasing that efficiency, increasing the understanding. Often we pitch the kind of data quality piece to exec level, and I think for me that's missing a step. I think the people who collect data, it's massively important that they understand where this fits in, and that's why having a strategy and a framework is really important. So the person who is entering in, you know, a date of birth, or who's entering in the date of a void, actually understands, well, if I don't put a date of birth in, it just puts 000000, and we have loads of people who are 121. Sorry, check the year. It's a bit of a worry. The last one's gone too fast. And also, you know, looking at void dates, are we considering things like voids as the day somebody moves out or the first day it's empty? So everyone has to be singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak. The kind of other parts of it, you know, are for me around ensuring your data is compliant, and that might be with legislation, it might be with regulatory returns, it might be with internal processes, procedures, and ultimately, and I think for not only for our tenants to ensure rent money is kept at kind of appropriate levels, but also it's been a challenging year income-wise. So having value for money through the way you manage your data, you know, often we work with organisations to increase their ability to do that, and actually what that provides is scope to provide better processes, better efficiencies, better data, and ultimately better decision making because of that.
I think that's a pretty good definition, Michael. So I guess just to sort of sum it up, I think what we've experienced on this kind of longer journey in producing the data standards is that you do need to take that kind of whole systems approach and that kind of cultural approach to data management. You know, the data standards have been a really great project where we've got a lot of collaboration around developing specific standards, such as around core customer data or reactive repairs. But one of the barriers to actually implementation really was that cultural piece, that kind of skills and capabilities piece, and understanding that, you know, at our business level, but also at a sector level, because I think there's a unique opportunity in social housing to collaborate between organizations, and there's a lot of benefits to doing that, but just understanding the kind of skills you do need and the processes, the structure, the strategy you need to actually make all of those things work in tandem. And I think that's what we've really been trying to do in the last year is do that piece of the jigsaw as well. You know, understand that the standards are a basis and a really good starting point, but actually upskilling organizations, upskilling individuals and getting everyone to work together, along the same lines as the standard does achieve, to actually achieve that kind of good level of data management at an organization level.
And so you guys are talking about this idea of standards. What does that entail for this? What is clean data essentially, or good data?
Good data sorry, on you go, Billy.
No, I was just actually going to run through the standards we had produced. That might be interesting for everyone to hear. So, as Michael mentioned, we've been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years, and we've covered a variety of areas that are really important to social housing. So in 2018, we got a group of UK housing providers to come together to produce the core customer data, the voids and allocation standards. The next project was also in 2018, looking at reactive repairs processes. Version 3, 2019, we were looking at care and support and asset maintenance and income and service charge collection. We're now into that version 4 part of the standards. We've completed development handover over most of last year, and we're now producing resident feedback and complaints data standards. So I guess it's probably a useful insight into the process to understand that what we do is kind of start with the core kind of components of what social housing offers. So look at we take a kind of problem-focused approach. So actually understand how are people using data and what purposes are they using that data for, with the end goal obviously being providing better services for residents, just to understand where we can make that data process work a bit better. So Michael, I'll let you pick up on the rest of the question, but I think it's a kind of useful insight into how I guess you should approach the problem of data management, is to actually think about how the data is being used at the end of the day.
I would just echo what Billy's saying. For me, what is data quality? What good standards of data is data that you can use, that you get insightful analytics from, that you can base real decisions on. So for me, I think I mentioned that one truth. It has to be the one truth of your organisation, and we've worked with organisations who have used like internal data standards, so it's not necessarily cross-sector. That's been, it works well, particularly larger organisations, kind of interdepartmental working. However, what I would say is that it doesn't allow for that benchmarking, and I think that's massively important. And having had conversations with Caitlin before about Bynaric, I think it's kind of central to the stuff they're doing, looking to have that kind of real snapshot of data that goes across the business. So if everyone's looking at the same areas, so having the same format of data, having the same data dictionary, again, I don't think you can be prescriptive about process, because for all 95% of what housing associations do is the same. We all do it differently because we've got different sizes, different staff bases, use different products. So I think setting out that journey and the kind of minimum standard of data we expect, I think that's what's very, very key in it. But ultimately, it's about producing a kind of transparent one truth of your organisation, that you can make decisions that you can then back up, and when data changes or when processes change, you can then analyse it in a different way. Whereas if you're not collecting it in a kind of understood or kind of joined up fashion, then it's very difficult to know when you've made internal changes what it is driving some of those changes in data. Not just because it could be different data quality, but you could be changing processes, you could be changing systems, and that might affect format of the data, the specifications. So I think there's loads to it, but ultimately for me, it's providing that one truth.
Yeah, and as you were saying there, this is part of why we wanted to have you guys on. This idea of having the one true source of information, of data for your entire organization from department to department, end to end, is really kind of the driving force behind Bynaric IPS. Certainly. So what have you guys seen in working with social housing within the UK or within elsewhere about why this isn't happening? What's the big barrier, the big stumbling block around having this mythical one source of truth?
I'm happy to jump in on that one first, Michael. I think we've often seen when working with providers more closely is that there are a lot of legacy systems, ways of working, which can really outlast their welcome in social housing. And there's barriers that creates when it comes to managing data, because you've got different parts of the business and different legacy systems, and with that kind of different processes and kind of levels of capability across the business that just create a mismatch. And obviously, when you're trying to look at data holistically and you're trying to kind of create a new data strategy which may implement standards more broadly, then that all becomes kind of a whole list of problems that you have to I guess you have to manage and you have to think about, and that's a big piece of work. Like, we don't try and pretend that implementing standards is easy. It is that kind of whole business approach that requires staff training, it requires new strategy, it requires potentially new systems. But it doesn't mean, just because it is difficult, it doesn't mean that those benefits aren't there kind of in the long term, and that the kind of incentive shouldn't be there to do that, because it is a way of cutting costs in the future, kind of becoming more efficient. It is a way of delivering better services and ensuring they're actually, the data you have about your residents is reflective of their real experience in a kind of up-to-date way. And I think there's a real danger if we do rely on outdated data, but also kind of outdated ways of processing that data. When the resident experience is changing day to day, and kind of there's new technology, new kind of types of social housing, and I think our systems really have to match. But yeah, understandably, it can seem like a massive journey to go down. And I think that's what we try and do at HACT and try and deal with the data standards, is to try and demystify it a bit and say that it's something you can approach sort of bit by bit. You can approach in collaboration, so learning best practice from your colleagues across the sector, and it's worth the effort, I think, kind of long term, I guess.
And again, to echo that, I think the point about it being it's a massive piece of work to implement standards or to increase data management or produce a data framework or data governance stuff. However, I think opportunities like this to get people together, and we find that when we work with data standards, even some of the opportunities we have just to meet people and to talk about it, it breaks up into more digestible chunks. And even thinking about what part of this will we implement first. Nobody implements data standards across the whole organisation in one piece, because it's too big a job. And so I think ultimately what's holding it back, my instinct is to say money. If organisations had more money, they would be able to spend more money on it, more time on it. And I think because it's a very, very labour intensive, if you've got bad quality data, you have to understand what data is bad quality, what parts of your process does it fall down, what bits of software either work or could you introduce. So actually having software that provides a kind of one source data is key to that. But I think there's more to it than just money. I think some of it, particularly social housing, it's often viewed. I've worked in social housing organisations for the last 17 years, and I think from my experience, it's very legislation driven. So because we're heavily regulated, we follow that. So you kind of wait until it's part of regulation to implement some of this stuff. So you might anecdotally be aware that things aren't as good as they could be. However, often it takes some level of change. So it could be legislation change, it could be staff change, it could be system change, really to approach that. So I think that's key, but also just that organisational capability to implement. So do you have people who understand the data? Do you have people who work with it, who collect it, who get the outputs from it? And I mentioned at the start that actually having staff really from grassroots up who understand what it is you're doing. We're often in meetings where you hear people talking about what we need here is a data lake, and everyone will sit and go, aye, absolutely. Nobody knows what that means in those meetings, or what the problem is big data. And a lot of people, so that's exec team, they won't understand some of those concepts, but because of the way they're brought about, often it's difficult to stop and think about, actually, do we understand a kind of glossary of these things? And so for me, there's a base level of education that's required, and then I think there's another step to being who's involved in implementing them, and do they grasp the organisational capacity, the culture, what level of data maturity you're at, to then think about what parts do we implement first and what do we need to change before we implement them.
You mentioned there about the people kind of on the ground or people who are entering the data. What sort of issues do you see around that specifically? I know we have a lot built into IPS around controlling what you can enter in a field. How else can organizations or individuals kind of be aware of that as well?
So I suppose what you say is absolutely correct. So having parameters on software, and for us, we're starting to work in the UK with the main providers of housing management software to ensure they are built to the UK housing data standards, which means we're all entering data, date of birth in the same format, referring to voids in the same way. So actually having that shared language, I think that's really important to know if your software calls a house an asset, someone else might call it, or refer to an occupancy or a tenancy. Actually, about us across the sector using the same language for the same things, and I think for kind of junior staff members who are dealing with that data, that's really important. It's important that they understand that. We spoke to loads of people, particularly in the last year, around doing some of this stuff, and often you hear people saying, I don't like data, or there's a fear about it, or but I don't deal with data. Well, you do. You're actually one of the people who gather that. So I think it's about having placing importance on understanding the data journey, and but also kind of training. And if you don't put in the correct data, we can't create the efficiencies for the tenants that you care about. And I think in social housing, people do care, and that's why they work in social housing, because they certainly don't do it for the money.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Michael was saying, I think that piece of data governance is just it's essential, and I think, as Michael said, we have spoken to people who don't view their roles as being built on data, but really the majority of roles in social housing at that kind of management level, at least, and kind of I think more broadly across the business, data is fundamental, because the resident experience is really complex. There's repairs, there's lettings, there's customer feedback, and in all of those respects, we're relying on the quality of data in different formats to make decisions. And I think you have to be able to demystify that the role data is playing in those decision-making processes from the ground up, and actually say that the data doesn't have to be something that's scary and done elsewhere. It's actually something we could all take a bit of ownership for, because data is essentially just it's information, it's insight, and there is some problem with kind of fear of the terminology, and I think that wider cultural change that is supported by kind of good data governance is a challenging process, but one that the whole sector needs to move towards. And we've seen some really good work of individual organizations kind of having different structures of data owners and data stewards to kind of manage that process. And yeah, again, it's another piece that isn't easy, but is really essential to actually getting to a point in the future where everyone actually understands their position in that kind of wider data structure.
We're actually doing some work just now around complaints and resident feedback in terms of building a standard for that. And I think that's a great example of where we think about a receptionist might think of answering a phone and supporting their tenants in the best way they can, but actually that's often the beginning of a data journey. So touch points with tenants, and it's ensuring that data is flowing into the same process that we work from. So if someone's complaining about the health and safety of a building, they might just mention it to someone, but they might have put a formal complaint in, or someone else in their building might put a complaint in, and it's about ensuring that the data all speaks to each other. So do staff members access that one truth, and how they do it? And I think they have to understand, thinking about kind of larger things like Grenfell, if all of the data, the different things that people understood about that building were mapped across an organisation, would different decision making been able to be made? I think for certain that could have happened, and I think it's important that we use all the data and the touch points we have with tenants to create data to flow into our decision making.
Definitely, this is one of my favorite parts always of IPS to show off to people, is that we have it. Probably all of the fields are controlled, and so you can only add certain things. It makes it easy to do it correctly. It makes it easy to do the data entry correctly. And same, you're talking about those touch points with tenants or with properties. they're just automatically added into the record. So the idea then being, you have more time to work with people, because as you were saying, if you're in social housing, your favorite thing probably is not adding information into a spreadsheet. So sort of beyond that idea of just being, the day-to-day side of, now I can spend more of my time working with the people. What are some of the sort of goals you have with improving data management for social housing? What are the benefits that a social housing provider can experience when they have better data management?
So just to pick up on the point I made there around the kind of the health and safety of that. So I think that's, for me, is key. So looking at asset maintenance, so ensuring that you have the right data in and you know how that's changed. It's a kind of standardized process. Then what you can provide is not just safer homes, but you can have assurance in those safer homes. And I think that is really key. Again, looking at potential regulation changes or the social housing white paper actually is calling out now we need to know about our properties in a standardised way. So it's the UK government doing stuff around the Golden Thread initiative. What data does every building require for its asset life cycle? And to ensure that data is the same data that starts the journey as it ends if a building's demolished at any point. And I think, for us, that's massive, and I think obviously you want to increase efficiencies, you want to reduce money, you want to reduce tenants' rent, but actually what is social housing there to do? It's there to provide housing for people who otherwise may have difficulty in where they live, and I think often people talk about housing associations promoting a place-based approach. Well, actually, a lot of that this year has been, just last year even, has been magnified, and it's been like a hyper place-based approach. So it's not about providing those services for your tenants or for their community. It's about providing that service for that house, because that's where the tenant is all the time. They're in that house because we're not, restrictions have been put in place. And it means that if you're not in suitable accommodation, you're not in safe accommodation, you're in overcrowded, or the effect that has on a person's well-being as well as their health and safety is massive. And I think the social purpose of our sector, it means that it's massively important that we, through data, create these challenges. Through data, we were able to analyse straight away which of our tenants were vulnerable, who's over 70, who lives themselves, who pays rent kind of face to face, and what did we put in place straight away? There was what contact details did we have, and where we had any missing data. It's about putting something in place that could solve that. And I think for me that just showed that data is massive for housing associations. It's massive that for the whole sector. Other sectors found that difficult. Local authorities don't often have the same. So they've got different challenges and they've got different remits, and it just means that their systems aren't configured in the same way as we are. And we were lucky that actually we made a real difference. And one of the things HACT had done is collated for the UK the impacts of COVID and what housing association provided, and talking into millions of welfare calls, millions pounds of kind of hardship support, because we analysed that from data we had to say who needs that help. We weren't just going about the streets throwing around 50s. We knew who needed it, and we got it there because we had the data that either told us that in the first place or that enabled us to analyse vulnerability through that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think sort of staying at that sector level and kind of future benefits, we're facing in the sector the challenge of understanding how to manage retrofit and how to meet net zero targets in the future. And understandably, this is, for many organisations we speak to, a kind of a new challenge, and one which we haven't been focusing on for the past 40 years, in social housing, and we're going to have to understand how to make the right decisions when it comes to those difficult decisions about where to kind of spend money on retrofitting homes, or kind of how those homes are then actually experienced by the residents and how they interact with new technologies that may help reducing carbon. And I think as we're going to face those new challenges that the sector has coming down the pipeline, we really need that data to be playing a kind of ongoing role in informing the decisions we do make, kind of making adaptations to the strategy we develop around kind of environmental goals. And I think it kind of highlights just how fundamental it is to get that data right and to have that common picture across the sector to make sector-wide decisions, but also have that internal picture within your organization to actually understand how to make the right decisions and how to respond to sort of changing pictures as that data tells you how that experience is playing out. So yeah, the sort of fundamental role in meeting those future challenges.
Nice. And this is one of my personal favorite things about working around social housing is that we can bring, it's not competing organizations. Everybody's here for the same purpose. So when one of us improves, everybody wins. Like, so I think that what you guys are working on, bringing that sort of idea of improving data management, we're not just going to improve a single organization. You know, we can have this sort of really societally wide impact on everybody's well-being, really. So I'm just conscious of time and want to leave time for questions. What are some of the sort of first steps? People are feeling a bit overwhelmed still with this idea of improving their data management and moving towards a one truth. What are some of the kind of first steps that they can maybe take?
So for us, you know, we often work with organisations who are in that position, and it's about building a kind of internal picture. So the support we give is often going in and kind of a diagnostic of an organisation, and where organisations can do that internally, great. You know, so for us, it's about what are the drivers to kind of data quality. What change do you require? How capable are you of doing that? And often the change is as cultural as it is about kind of infrastructure. So we encourage a kind of holistic approach to that. I think where I started is what I go back to is building a kind of data governance framework. I think to understand how all this fits in, you know, housing management software is key to that. Because it's where we often take the information from to make those decisions. But ultimately, all of the data you have, either structured or unstructured, we want to be able to make decisions on. We want it to be transparent. So we do training around that data framework, the learning labs, which is in effect just breaks down kind of housing associations into kind of what level of data maturity you're at, what do you need to improve on? Is it interdepartmental? Is it external partner working, and where the kind of key improvements can be made, and then setting out a governance, a framework that will enable us to achieve that. So I think that's massive. I think implementing standards, I'm not saying it has to be UK housing data standards, but having data standards across, anyone who's kind of big up in that will either attest to that or will be going through that journey. But I think for me, where do you start? I would say don't panic, because we're all in a state of flux. I think there's always change, and where there's change, there's possibility to improve. We do a lot of work with the sector, and everyone is trying to achieve that. And I think, where do you start? Just almost an internal audit of that stuff to find what can we do ourselves, and what do we need external support for? What do we need new tech solutions for? Or what in the future could we have tech solutions for? And I think some of the stuff about data, which we've possibly not touched on, is around future proofing, and Billy spoke about the kind of environmental and sustainability piece. So it's important that we future proof our assets and future proof the environment, but actually it's important that we future proof our data so that we can embrace new challenges, new technology, new legislation. And for me, it's about understanding what it is you have, and you need to create that framework to do it.
We can definitely share the link to the UK housing data standards. I think if you fancy a bit more reading, it's just good to have a little delve around it and kind of look at what we've done in a UK context and kind of see how we've approached the problem. We've got a series of documents and webinars that we've run over the past 4 years, which try and break down both the process through which we develop the standards, the kind of outcomes as well as thinking about some of the business benefits. So there's a lot there. We've been doing this for 4 years, so we've produced a lot of content, but it's a good way into thinking about, I guess, where some of the kind of end benefits are to doing this and to beginning this journey. And I think the key learning from doing the UK housing data standards is that collaboration in social housing works really well if you put the time into it, because we all have the opportunity to learn from what our colleagues are doing in different organizations. We have the opportunity to work towards common goals, and I think that collaboration allows us to make a bit quicker progress, and also actually to have that kind of sector level of collaboration that means that the outcomes for all of our residents, all of our communities are improved, because we don't have to think about just our own residents or kind of just our own local areas. We can actually think of the benefits for a kind of national and broader perspective. So I think it's really good to begin that collaboration early, continue having conversations, continue having working groups or whatever that might look like in your context, but to put the time in, because it does pay off in the long run.
Yeah, and that's one of the, I was just actually speaking with somebody right before we got on today about one of the nice things about the way we've set up IPS at Bynaric is that same idea of, thinking about what are you trying to get to, what do you have, how do we adapt to that, and then how do we continue adapting as you change, as everything changes, as random pandemics happen and you finally discover you need something you didn't have before, which, knock on wood, will not happen again anytime soon. I want to open it up for any questions, if anyone has questions for Micheal and Billy about data or HACT or anything that has come up throughout today.
I suppose one of the things I was thinking about mentioning when Billy was talking about the learning labs, sorry, about the data standards. Well, I've now lost my train of thought altogether. I don't know. Sorry. I was trying to read a note at the same time. I was thinking, I don't know what I was talking about. But I think it's about when you introduce the data standards, and I think wouldn't necessarily, as I said, tell everyone to do that from at one time, but understanding where it is that you want to achieve that. Sorry, what I was going to say, yes, the thing that I think it's about a business case. So, producing a business case internally to say, what is it that we want to achieve? What efficiencies or difference do we want to make from improving our data? Because I think a bit like, working in IT, that you can always develop these things, but unless you have a real kind of push to why that you're doing that, it can sometimes lose focus. You can never ever, get to a point where all your data is 100% beautiful and clean, and so you can always improve on it. But actually understanding what it is you want it to achieve can help. And I think creating a business case for any change or work or improvement or upgrade in that, I think it's, we do it when we create a data standard. So it's not a financial thing, just what are the reasons that you would implement this? What would it do for your business? And I think that goes across, to any of the work someone would do internally. And, as Billy said, the data standards are free to download, so go and have a look. And the business case for each version are there, just to understand for each part of that, whether that's care and support or voids or customer details, what the kind of granular improvements and importance are to increase your standards there. Got there in the end.
Great. Then I have no questions from anybody there. Everybody is overwhelmed still by the thought. There we go. Shay has a question. He says, Billy, you mentioned having data to try to make the right decisions for low energy retrofits. What do you use to analyze that data to identify most effective energy saving measures at scale?
So it's actually an emerging piece of work for us. So we've been having conversations internally at HACT, and we've been speaking to some of our partners in this space. There's a lot of opportunities there, because obviously, we have opportunities to survey existing stock with some sort of innovative tools that emerging. So I don't have any specific answers on that, but I guess what I'd say is it's important to tackle this problem right now, so to have those conversations. And I think that's an example of where collaboration is really important, because what we see in a UK housing context is that organizations are quickly trying to work out how they approach this problem. There's a lot of good software providers, a lot of good kind of thought leadership going on at the moment, but we don't have time, and obviously net zero targets are always changing, and we know that it's a kind of time press issue, and I wish I had the answer for you, but I would encourage more kind of partners to begin speaking to each other and be really open about the learnings you get from doing some of these, potentially doing trials, doing pilots, trying things out, and kind of ensuring that we get to those answers much quicker, because I think we can't take as long as we have with some of the other standards to get this right. But yeah.
Shay, I would point you in the direction of the Good Economy's ESG framework. And I think so. ESG is the environmental social governance, and it gives kind of outcomes which are based on certain data that you may already collect, or that organisationally you will have. And I think I was looking at it yesterday with colleagues in Scotland and trying to interpret some of the language was used based on some of the English regulation, but actually it's really universal. They mentioned some things around buildings meeting, I think it's the building safety, or not, so good housing quality. In Scotland, it's the SQS standards. So I think it's about us, interpreting that for whatever nation or region you're in. But I think certainly the ESG framework that the good economy have produced is really a good starting point to think about what data can help you analyse where you're at and what measures. I mean, for me, I don't think it's the complete picture, but certainly it's a comparable framework that's worth looking at, I would say.
We have, I'd say, throw in one of the things we've with IPS being adaptable and kind of planning for the future always, this idea of being ready for Internet of Things, for everything being connected and measuring, so that in the future it can be a click of a button and this is what's best energy wise, this is what's working, this is what's not. Steve, you have a question?
Thanks a lot, Caitlin. Billy, Micheal, thank you very much. Great overview. Love the work that you're doing. I'm just sort of sharing in the form of a question do you think there's any lessons from COVID data? So, there's been charts on the TV screens just about every day. We've been trying to understand the trends, like why is it down on a Monday? Well, actually the data is 2 days out of date. League tables, are we doing better or worse than this country? What's the population? What's the density? And next slide, please. Different visualizations. Do you think good and bad, there's any lessons to be learned from the COVID data?
Yeah, I think there definitely is, and it's something me and Micheal we're speaking about the other day. Data is really powerful in that it can tell us what is happening, but there's always that question as to, is it being used to tell a certain story, or are we not kind of framing it or viewing it in a way that captures some of the complexity that's going on? And I think we've seen with COVID, and I think the same lessons obviously more broadly, that data can be used to tell certain stories, and it can be used to match kind of perspectives we may already hold, or kind of business priorities, and I think that's obviously a real danger. And there's a lot of kind of ethical questions around the role of data in those respects, and there's potential for us, even not maliciously, but missing pictures that the data is potentially telling us. To definitely kind of learnings from Grenfell and the recent occasions of damp and mold in around London that we've seen in the news. That data should be granular enough, and we should be always critical as to kind of what stories it's telling us and how we're framing it, how we're communicating it to it. So it's not just a kind of PR exercise of this is a great story we want to tell using our data. I think there's some real learnings and some real honesty around continuing kind of to be critical of what that data is telling us, and continuing to be kind of prepared to actually say, we made a mistake here, and potentially, we need to look at our data again and kind of collect different data. And I think COVID has really shown that has to be an ongoing process, and we can't just assume that what the data is seemingly telling us is correct.
I think it's a great point, Steve, actually, and to be honest, it's given the time, it's not something that I've particularly thought about, but just thinking about exactly the points you made, that, and I know it's different, particularly in Scotland, the way we looked at the data initially, so it gave us a different outlook, and they were then, on our daily briefings, it was kind of starred with, kind of will fall into line with English or UK figures, and I think for me, what else that suggests is standardisation. So, even as that, are you do it weekly, so you have an average over days, rather than having, a Monday, it seems like everybody dies, but nobody dies on a Sunday, without seeming kind of cut about it. I think what it certainly told us was that people suffering existing inequalities were disproportionately affected by it. And I think that is where, for me, data analysis becomes really difficult, because it's hard to know which indices is then causing the change. So for me, it's about collecting the right data. So do you need to collect different data that tells that story? So we work on the data standards with an international data standard agency, Oscar, and Chris, who's our technical director that works on that, often says, if you're collecting data that's telling the same story, stop collecting it, because it's not telling you how to change things. And I think for me, that's what it suggests. You need to collect data that is changing, and collect data that's telling you the right story. Why are Black and ethnic minority people more affected by COVID? Is it because the socioeconomic living conditions? Is it because a kind of I don't know, kind of medical issues that are suffered by different groups of people? Is it to do other cultural sensitivities around it? And I think it's really key for us to understand the drivers, and it's a bit like anything to do with data management. Understanding the drivers to what's causing the outcomes is really key to it. So I mean, to get back to it, what lesson can we learn? That we need to initially use data, because we didn't use it, we didn't make decisions based on it. So we didn't lock down when the SAGE committee were telling us to, so more people died. And so if that's to use that in a housing context, we know that there's certain things around assets, the cladding. If we just ignore that and continue to use it, actually you're putting people at risk. So it's about making real decisions that have massive implications in terms of locking down a country, in terms of pulling down buildings, in terms of somebody paying millions of pounds of compensation, making those really difficult things based on evidence, regardless of what it tells you. So for me, that's the main lesson, but also the kind of standardisation of how we articulate that. And for overall, don't have somebody with too many visuals that you have to say, next slide, please, is the massive overarching issue with it all.
100%.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. We're at the time, we're just wrapping up. So Micheal and Billy, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with everybody here?
I've definitely spoken too much, but I'm sure Billy can fill you in with his last words of wisdom.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think we've given many pearls of wisdom, but yeah, I think we'd be happy more broadly to if people have inquiries, if they have a chance to look at the standards and kind of pick through them. Very much the approach you've taken in a UK context is we want to share the learnings. We want to bring people together, and there's no reason why that should be kind of UK bound as well. We've had conversations with colleagues, across Europe as well, and in Canada, and I think more broadly, there are opportunities to kind of bring this learning together and to continue having that conversation, because there's things that we'll be doing that could be improved, that we could learn from colleagues elsewhere. So yeah, just encourage you to kind of stay in touch and get in touch with any questions that you do have if you have a chance to go through the work you've already done.
And there, I was just about to say. So if anybody is interested in finding out more information about HACT, they're at hact.uk.org. I think I did that in the right order. Yes. .org.uk. No, I'm looking at it now and realize I said it backwards. So the guys are at HACT. If anybody is interested in learning more about how IPS and our data management system can help social housing manage your data better, make data management simple, straightforward, not scary like we were talking about today, and how it can help you to meet your goals, we are at Bynaric.com. I will drop that here. There we go. We are at Bynaric.com. So we welcome you to come and take a look at what we do and how we can help you, like I said, meet your goals when it comes to providing social housing for those who need it. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone for coming today, for jumping between links for me, and thank you everyone for your patience and giving up your lunch hour on a Friday. I hope everyone has a lovely rest of the day and a nice weekend. So thanks, and we hope to see you again at our webinar in May.
Take care. Thank you, guys.
Cool. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.